All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another NPAN Live. I see some familiar faces here. Really happy that everybody's taking some time out of their day to join us. I know it's the production time right now across the country, and we sure do appreciate your company. Today, we're talking about something that's we've been talking about it for a very long time, but it's particularly juicy right now because there are some people in the government who have taken notice to this national conversation among meat processors and livestock producers, and they're getting their hand in the pie now. So today's topic is deregulation for small meat processors: the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what it looks like to again bring state-wise autonomy to make decisions about where, when, and to whom you can sell your meat, essentially. And we're going to have a bit of a discussion because we're represented by a lot of different folks with a wide demographic here. We've got producers, we've got processors, we've got probably a few people from with some .gov emails and .edu emails here. I think we've probably got a few people here who also are part of brands. So we're happy to hear everybody's perspective. Quickly, if you haven't joined us before, NPAN is the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. We're an extension-based community housed at Oregon State University, but we've got a national reach. We collaborate with many different universities and other NGOs and various nonprofits to bring technical assistance to small meat processors and livestock producers. So we're made up of a patchwork of people in the industry. As you can see in this graph, we're the lion's share are meat processors, but we're also made up of just under a quarter of livestock producers. We've got CPG or meat brands, startups. We've got retail shops around the country. We've got industry reps and vendors, as well as academia, extension, and regulatory. So, when you hop on our listserv, which is a Google group, if you haven't been there, search NMPAN under Google Groups. That is a fantastic resource. It's a live, not a live, but it's a very responsive help desk, essentially. You can post questions there. There's no dumb questions. If you have anything that you need to know about the industry, there's somebody here made up from one of these groups that can answer it and often does answer it really quickly. And, among that, we've also got a robust website and short courses, long courses, and all sorts of things. So if you're interested in what NPAN does and you're unfamiliar, please check out our website, nichemeatprocessing.org. Everything we do, for the most part, is free, unless it's a longer academic course, which is extremely inexpensive, compared with what you get. So basically, our mission is to help small meat processors thrive by growing our shared wealth of information and innovation. We're a community of knowledge, and we share. We want to offer tools and technical assistance for small processors and the farmers, marketers, and meat buyers who depend on them. And then, we're looking into the incorporation of the whole array of interests involved in the supply chain model to support the long-term viability of the niche meat sector. So we're not just here to support processors and livestock producers, but we're here to do work and research and build infrastructure with logistics and cold storage and supplier relationships and everything in between. So, yeah, thanks for joining us today. Again, I'm here to talk about deregulation in the meat industry, and joining me, everyone, please welcome Dr. Denise Perry. We're so excited to have her here today. I've worked, if you've taken the Meat Processor Academy, you've been there, you were there for Dr. Perry's operations session. She's also on the board of advisors for NPAN, and so she helps make decisions and shape all of the educational content and the strategy that we have as an organization. She's a native of southeastern Minnesota. She earned her master's and her PhD in meat animal science. She served as assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville for 5 years, teaching various courses in meat animal production and processing and overseeing a small pilot meat lab. Denise has been a plant manager for years, overseeing her plant's food safety and regulatory programs, a robust humane handling program. She's a specialist in humane handling. organic SQF certifications and other specialties. She's also contributed on a national level to several small and very small plant roundtables across the country, and she wants to help to be a voice for the small processor in all things regulatory. So most recently, Denise has left the production environment to start her own consulting business, and it's called Single Shot Consulting. Her primary focus is on serving small and very small processors in all things meat processing. So, you'll be able to get a hold of her with additional questions at the end. But yeah, I'd love to just get started here. A couple of guidelines. We got a lot of people here today, which we're very stoked about. This is kind of this is a little different from a webinar. It's not just going to be a lecture. We're going to have a little bit of a presentation to start, and then we're going to roll into some questions. And the way we're going to do questions and comments is we're going to utilize the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom. It's easier to manage and keep track of than the chat box. So all your questions, put them in the Q&A box or raise your hand. If you want to use the raise hand function, that's another option. And that one you can do under the reactions button. You'll see raise your hand. I'm going to be moderating those. If you have a question during Denise's presentation, I'm going to try to wait for a natural break because she's also going to be putting together some live polls, which we're really excited about. This is an interactive, a new thing for us here. You're going to be able to log into a page on your computer or on your phone and give your actual input to these questions live, and we'll be able to see them anonymously, of course, on the screen. So we're going to wait for some natural breaks for questions, and then when it comes to opening up the mic at the end, we're going to kind of try to take it by subject. Obviously, this is a hot button issue, so bear with us as we figure out how to do this. So yeah, that's what I've got. Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Dr. Denise, please take it away.
All right, David, do you need to let anyone in before? You can let people in once I share my screen, right?
You betcha. Yep, we're good to go.
I'm gonna get this up, hopefully successfully. Try and start my slideshow. All right, is it looking legit on there?
Looks good.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Yeah, I want to keep this as interactive as possible. It's hard for me with the computer, but I'll try. So that's why I have David that's gonna be like my live audience to remind me I have a live audience. So I'll get into a little bit why this even came up for me personally when we get into this a little bit more. But before we do that, as David mentioned, I would love participation in some of this live polling. As a preface, I saw this for the first time last spring and I because I didn't know what the heck it was, but I gave it a shot. And just so you all know, you won't get any junk text after this or any junk email. So just as long as you, and that's from the text session. So if you just text the 22333 and then Denise Perry 888 to that number, it'll let you, it'll just respond, yep, you're now part of this poll. If it sends you an error message, just try it a couple more times. And then when we're done, if you just type in leave, it prompts you to do this as well. It tells you to do this. It will leave you alone. It won't bug you again. And then David, we did a practice on Monday and he did the desktop version. And I think that seemed to go smoothly for him as well. So I'd love as much participation as we can because it's great. The first part is going to be getting to know kind of who's in the audience, what perspective you're coming from. And that just helps guide, how I form questions or talk to you guys or ask questions and discussion topics. So the first questions, as I noticed, are kind of want to give you guys a few minutes a bit. I did text. The first
Denise,
one.
Denise,
Yep.
could you go back just? Oh, you've got it right there. Never mind. I just wanted to make sure everybody saw the address if they want to text or they want to log in.
Yep.
How to do that really quickly.
Yeah, and it'll be at the top of every slide that has a poll. And there's a few different versions. There's ones that will just show us words, and the more people put the same word in, the bigger the word will get, and they'll show us our cluster. Some are multiple choice, and I'll prompt you through some of those because they're not always how I want them. But This first one is just a word cloud. So whatever word you type in is going to pop up. It only likes one word though. So if you have multiple words that you want to use, just use a hyphen or don't put a space. But if everyone can just send me, type it in and tell me what you are. There we go, extension. It's going to get a feel for who we're talking with today. And my hope is that we have a good, I'm glad to see producer, a good variety. Good.
This is awesome.
Yeah, it's neat.
Where has this been my entire webinar life?
That's what when I first started seeing, I'm like, what magic is this? It's super helpful. We got producers, consultant, owner, plant owner, support farmer, organization, training, academic. So food safety manager, I think. There we go, food safety. Plant
Great.
manager. So this is what I was hoping for, is a really well-rounded. I was actually hoping for some of those government people that you saw too, because it's important if we're going to have a well-rounded conversation about this. Maybe they'll come out of the lobbyist. All right, that's good. Good. Oh, cool. Good. This is a great group. I'm gonna let just that's one downside, is like waiting a little bit. So now we have a pretty good idea of what our base is. This is great. Great. All right, so from that, I'm going to ask, this is gonna get a little bit more, sorry, you can't see all these. So if you want to just respond with A, B, C, or D, I'm sorry, E goes off the screen, but this is just if you're from a facility or work at a facility in any capacity, what size facility you're coming from. And this will adjust as people put in their answers. I have to move my face so I can see what our percents are here. Scroll down, see where we're a good chunk are going to be from the very small and none of the above, which is good. I've got a couple from the large, though. That's good variety. Fantastic. All right. If you can do the calculation, curious about, and this is just a number, so you'll just put a number out there. How many beef equivalents do you process per week? And we're using the 3 hogs or lamb per 1 beef calculation. $5.75. What's this? Yeah, this is one of those where it has to be one word as well. I should have clarified that. A good variety there. All right. I promise this isn't going to be all questions. Well, I'll start to talk a little bit more here. And then inspection status, I'm sorry, this one doesn't show up how I want it to. So it's going to be oh man. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can change your response to according to how I set it up. So 1 being state, 2 USDA custom exempt, 3 USDA be a mix. Quite a few USDA.
Glad to see we've got some custom processors here.
Yeah, and that we'll kind of speak to that a little bit here. Interesting, very few state inspected. But that's also Good. I like the balance between the custom exempt and the federal group. And then some multiple. Good, good. So this is a really great group for this conversation, a really good variety. So we're not going to just have one voice here, which is always the most useful. And then if you just want to let me know where you're coming from. This is a bit to do with the context of geography, which I think is really important to this subject matter. And so very Northwest, Washington, Montana, California, Kentucky, fantastic again. Oh, this is like the best crowd ever because it's like everywhere. Totally what we need for the discussion. Good. Wyoming, fantastic. Texas. It's open, David. You had said maybe in Alaska, but I don't not seeing Alaska. Really hoping for an Alaska because okay, very good. Good, good, good. No Maine. Maine would be good. Vermont, though, good. All right, fantastic. So now we'll get to the nuts and bolts here. So why are we here? A little bit of background on why I'm even here. In late May, early June, I unexpectedly got contacted by a House Judiciary Committee council and wanting to, and this day of spam, you get those emails and you're like, are you trying to get money from my long lost cousin? I don't know. And basically they were vetting me to speak in front of the House Judiciary Committee because they were going to be talking, the senators or whoever, we're going to be talking about this topic. And I had about, if they were to choose me, I had about a week to prepare. And one of the concerns I had was that gave me no time to talk to small processors because that's who I really wanted to reach out to and get their thoughts. Ultimately, I didn't get picked. Greg Gunthorpe did. I don't know if he's on here. He was going to be on here. He warned me he had a question, so looking forward to it. He did a fantastic job, and they had a couple other representatives. Of course, maybe me. I texted afterwards and said I would have done way better than most of them, except for Greg. But it did really get me thinking, what do the processors think? I've been part of processing. I've been in that trench, but I was just one facility in, in a great district. And I know others are fortunate. And so very curious. And so that's kind of what brought David and I into the conversation, chatting about it. And then the rest is history. We're here today. So the main premise of that call that I was invited to was to talk about Thomas Massey's Prime Act. He's a representative from Kentucky. And so getting an idea of how many of you are familiar with it or what your level of familiarity is will help me understand how much to talk about it in the next slide. And I full disclosure, I can give you just like a real blip of it. I've read it a few times and it's really short, which makes me wonder if I really found the right thing. But I do know a little bit of the background of it and whatnot. So good. We have a good chunk that are kind of there with us. And so some yes, some no. So those of you that said yes, please feel free to like poke and add if I'm misrepresenting this at all or misunderstanding it at all, because I certainly don't want to get the wrong message out here. But this is like a nutshell. These are not verbatim words coming from the act itself. There is, if you Google the HR 2814 Prime Act, you will find the words. I think the premise is where it came from was during the pandemic. We all know about the bottleneck that ensued, and then producers not being able to get in with processors because us small processors got inundated because the big ones were turning away all the animals. We all know, we all lived it. So this was basically Massey heard producers really upset that had they been able to go to custom exempt plants, they would have had more markets to sell, and then there would, they essentially could have gotten rid of some of that bottleneck. How much, we don't know, but a good chunk. And I certainly would have loved to not hear about mass truckloads of hogs getting euthanized during that time. So essentially the voice of this is to give back some of this power to the states, meaning right now in the Federal Meat Inspection Act, it talks about states that develop them must be equal to, and he's saying that's not in the spirit of giving states power when you basically tell them they have to do what the federal government is doing. It also has very specific verbiage about custom exempt being allowed to do more direct sales, whether it's to farmers market, it's all within the state still, but whether it's at farmers markets or local restaurant or some institutions, all again being within that state. So that's really the nutshell. Does anyone have any additions to what I've said? Did I totally skim it over too much? Anything that I should make sure we point out? I don't think we really have to get too deep into the weeds on it. That's the overall premise. Getting anything, David?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much hit everything that is available. They, essentially they propose that this is a decision that should be up to the states, and it should be on the table to sell custom exempt meat from person to person. You enter a business relationship, and you take on the responsibility of your purchase. That's essentially what it is. Very old school model, and that's the premise of it.
Yeah, so I'm not super surprised that we don't have any state inspected facilities represented, because I don't really see this impacting states, the states that have their own state inspection systems, as heavily as states that don't have a state inspection system and that do rely heavily on custom exempt. Those are the states I really believe will be most impacted by this. I come from a state that has a state inspection program, so that's part of why it was kind of like, why are you calling me? I don't understand this. And then once I dug into it, now I've been around to the roundtables that we do with FSIS, and I start to get a much better grasp on it, on rural versus right by freaking Twin Cities. So there's a big difference there, and I think that's what this all really boils down to, and why it's important to have the conversation, because we don't all live right next to a metropolitan area. Every farmer doesn't have a plant within an hour or two to travel to that can allow them to market and sell their product.
We've got a couple of comments, if now's a
Yep.
good time. So got a comment from Justin. Justin says, my plant is state inspected, and if the Prime Act was to go through, then it would alleviate the massive bottleneck in our state of Texas that the program currently has. And so, yeah, I mean, essentially, custom exempt right now, you cannot sell that meat, right? That is strictly from person to farmer.
Not legally.
Yeah, you legally can't sell the meat, right? Yeah, so the person goes. If anybody doesn't know what custom exempt is, in a nutshell, a person goes to the farmer, says, "I want a beef." Farmer says, "Okay, great. You're going to pay me a deposit, or however. There's a cash transaction, so that person now owns the beef. Farmer, when the beef is ready, sends the beef to the slaughterhouse. The buyer, the customer, pays the slaughterhouse and the processor a service fee, pays the farmer for the beef. They take it all home. It's uninspected. Very little in between. Super simple. And the Prime Act is saying that why can't we give that same right to restaurants and institutions and schools and wholesalers to be able to do that as well. So Justin, it sounds like in Texas, the perception is that it would alleviate a huge bottleneck that's there.
Oh, that's great to know. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark says, with the equal to requirement, when the USDA does not enforce its own federal laws, what really takes place is that the state is required to enforce greater than laws. So that's interesting. So it sounds like in a place where maybe USDA is a little more lax, it sounds like Mark's saying that when there's a state program, the state ends up being the more rigorous of the two, which sends a strange message.
Yeah, the inconsistency of it all is always the bottom line. And so moving forward then, is the what ifs. What if this were to happen? And that's really what we're kind of taking apart here the rest of the presentation. And the whole point of federal inspection is to make meat safer. We know that there's a lot that's a really oversimplified reality of being part of an inspected plant or being looked at by government regulators or regulators, for that matter. And so that's where, the bottom line is, if this were to be allowed, and if this happened, how do we make sure we still maintain a safe food supply and humane treatment of animals? I mean, that's where we're going with this. So this one, I'm going to show, this one is basically an emoji based, and it's not showing my A, B, C, D. So just assume A is the top and then B, C, D. So I just want to give a general feel for how people are viewing their state or federal USDA inspection systems. This had to be like my favorite one to put together because I was really excited to see this because I had some guesses on how it would go. And the two highest responses are the ones I assumed would be in solidarity, I will say. And it probably depends on the day. So I acknowledge, like, today it might be really angry. It will probably bounce between A and D, honestly. Or B, just being exhausted from it all. So I totally, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but unfortunately humans are involved and that makes it always tricky. So, it's a pretty, once we get past the pissed off, it's generally even balance of emotions. But yeah, I mean, I've felt all of these personally within the plant. It's just a matter of what's our overall balance of it, right? And so again, yeah, so I'm not going to say much about that. Feelings are, so much dictated by experience with your inspector or inspectors and the support that they're giving in either direction. Oops, I should know how to run this by now. Arrow, Denise. Okay, so one question I have for you guys, this is going to be another word cloud, so just one word or use hyphens or no spaces to give your response. But if you can describe in one word the value regulation has to the industry, to your own personal processing, to your own personal perspective. I mean, good accountability, absolutely. We'll talk about that in the upcoming slides. Animal welfare has been a huge advance in that. Setting basic standards, that's a roadmap, right? Roadmaps are so important. You don't know what you don't know, so there is some value to the template of the regulation. Setting consumer trust. That one's curious, to me. Sometimes we'll talk about this later on as well. Is sometimes I wonder. I think there's a really educated consumers that understand what it all is, and then I think there's others that are absolutely clueless, no matter what level of regulation you have, or under or not under. Yeah, good consistency. That's a good one. Yeah, fantastic. Oh, inequality. That one's curious. It drives inequality among business. Is that what the inequality perhaps means? I would love to hear more about that if whoever wrote it wants to speak to it, whether it's now or later. So these next few slides are just my 30,000 foot kind of rundown on, I don't even say what value I see regulation has, the factors that go into food safety and humane handling. And so the bottom of this is facility size. And even though we don't have a medium category, which I know some of us would love to see a medium category, because they really make a large jump from small to large. So because I want medium to be a category, I put it in there. So facility size, really dictates a lot of the different factors that ultimately result in what risk level we're at for food safety. But there's another component that I'll get into in the next slide that ultimately is the root of food safety. And so the larger the plants get, the more volume output and the more reach their product is. Now today in the internet and online sales, I think this gap is shrinking a bit. But for the most part, that large volume and that large product reach really enhances that facility's risk. However, when you add in resources and support that they have available, they not only have teams of food safety quality managers that are highly skilled, but they also have teams of attorneys that can sift through a lot of NRs and determine if it's, they're going to fight it, they're going to, go ahead and make sure that you fix that. And then as you go down in size, you have less and less of that available just because you're trying to survive as a business. And not only, then you think going down to that very small size, a lot of you are just starting. You are the bookkeeper, you are the scheduler, you are the grinder, you are the slaughter person, you're knocking those animals, you're receiving those animals, and you're the food safety expert. That's a lot to put on a person. And that alone drives an element of food safety risk because nobody can do all those things at once. Well, super, you guys do it every day, but really to feel like you're nailing it. And at the end of the day, what you don't know what you don't know. And that's something that I said a lot when I was in the plant environment is, sometimes you learn right there on the spot. And then you deal with it in the best you can. So the one component that I don't have on here that really does contribute to risk, the bottom line is it boils down to management and ownership and what value you place on food safety and humane handling. And so we could have a super large plant. I'm going to use the most obvious example from, I think it was early 2000s, the Hallmark Westland case. They're a large facility and their humane handling obviously got them put all over the news and people went to jail, rightly so. And unfortunately, some of the people that got put to jail were the ones that were doing what the ownership told them to do. And that's a really crappy place to be in when you're trying to feed your family. And so management and ownership really dictates the ultimate food safety risk and humane handling practices in a facility. And that can make or break that risk. So from my perspective, when you get into regulation, that template, that, accountability, the regulatory oversight really helps to rein in the poor management, the people that maybe don't know what they don't know, and help guide and get that leveled out. I have been a fan of the FSIS. I have been a very stern talker to the FSIS before. So I really do try to look at things from a very neutral perspective. And so I do think that it does bring some accountability and expectation and help, and it can be a really useful resource. Now, from here, we're going to get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. In each of those topics, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of both regulatory oversight and where we see maybe Prime Act could be good, bad, and ugly. David?
Yeah, I've got a question, and I guess it could be like a raise of hands or just like a type a yes in the chat box. How many people here rely on FSIS a little bit to help them at their plant? Like I'm thinking about my time as a plant manager, and I've worked for owners who have asked me to do things that I know were not legal or ethical in order to get product out the door, and I felt like I leaned on FSIS to help me do what was right. Does anybody here have any experience with that, or am I just a very bad judge of character when it comes to employers?
I do too, David. Yeah, I've experienced that in my career, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point.
And I think that's a really, you know, and then we hear from a lot of other people who have a very opposite experience. But I'm just curious about this because this is kind of what I hear you saying in this particular slide.
Yeah, and one thing that I maybe could put on here too. I mean, you can variable this to death, but I could split the hair into regulatory oversight and put a really good one and a bad inspector, and that can throw everything off the rails as well. And so we all acknowledge that inspector, and that's one of the biggest topics at the very small plant roundtables that take up a good chunk of those sessions times. Is it really usually boils down to a bad apple, or a district that's not responsive and not there to help necessarily everyone succeed. And so those are when that's kind of in the ugly section.
Yeah. Just a couple comments. Justin says our inspectors at DSHS here in Texas can be extremely helpful, especially when we had a customer take state inspected product out of the state to sell and we had to deal with the USDA investigation. I have heard that state inspection services take a more mentor, collaborative approach to oversight. I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard that in Oregon. I've heard that now. I've heard that in Texas. I've heard that in other states. I don't know if that's true across the board, but that is kind of encouraging to hear. I like to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then John comments, oh, okay, Mark says in Wyoming, state is very helpful.
Yeah.
Very good data.
Yep. And I think that goes back to this value of giving it to the states, because those state inspectors understand the context of that state. The regulation does not. The regulation is an all-encompassing blanket approach, and we'll get into that. Book written by a bunch of attorneys and read by not attorneys, veterinarians and not attorneys, and now we're all supposed to interpret it the same way. Anyway, I get ahead of myself there.
That's interesting, though. I'm happy to hear that, and of course,
yes.
This
very encouraging.
This session is really about gathering data, understanding the voice of our people, right, the NPAN community, so that when these conversations continue to happen at the academic and legislative level, we understand how to represent, right? So the more input we get, the better. We've got a comment from John Edwards. He says, no, never ask FSIS. John, if you want to elaborate on that, feel free to grab the microphone for a moment. But I think you're saying, like, keep your cards close to your chest. Don't ask FSIS for help. I know that's another position.
When you do, you have to word it extremely carefully. I was always very calculated when I asked USDA for help and how I asked for it. So I might have like a fire in the carcass cooler, but I'm going to be more like, so a friend of mine called and they had a fire in their carcass cooler. More often than not, it worked. So I was always very careful. Or, hey, we're thinking about doing this. So what would happen if that? And just be very careful. So there are ways to ask them without, having them go look immediately in whatever area you're talking about. And I've done it. If you need help formulating those questions, those are some of my favorite challenges, to mess with them in that regard.
That's something that Travis Stockstill trained me in many years ago, was how to ask a question without asking from your own perspective.
I read Greg had an interesting discussion about how Ask FSIS has been lately. I didn't realize they merged, unfortunately. It sounds like the service is to shit, but excuse my language. But Ask FSIS I loved, but I also learned quickly that you don't formulate your question as a pissing match. Do not give them any hint that you and your inspectors are having a disagreement and you're using them as a referee, because they will they will find every reason to get the inspector right. And so formulating those questions are always, if you don't have time to put thought into it at the time you're sending it, wait until you can take a breath and formulate it in a way it doesn't look like you're against each other or trying to be right or they're trying to be right. Just make it a very neutral, to the point question. And I've had better luck with that. Not necessarily in the last couple times I've sent, but that was something that I noticed very quickly. And go with facts. So when we talk about the good relative to regulatory control, we talked a little bit about this in our word cloud. It does help kind of even out that risk level and protect consumers from poorly managed, negligent food safety, humane handling, or naive operations. So it's not always that is saying I don't give a crap about safety or humane handling. It's just sometimes they just know. They think they're doing so well, and they're doing the best they can with what they have. So it's not purposeful, but it does help give that guidance and that template. You know, SSOPs and GMPs and SOPs. My major professor, he really we had a discussion about busy work and hating busy work when I was doing my my graduate work, and his whole thing was whenever you do something, make it valuable to you. You know, so if you're just taking SSOP templates and plugging it in or having a consultant just write, you know, take their templates and throw it out at you, it's pointless. I mean, if you're going to make SSOPs, make them worthwhile, make them an accountability statement for your staff, for your own people, a guidance to follow. Otherwise, it's just busy work and you've just wasted everyone's time. So you might as well make it worthwhile. And then hold people accountable and follow through with them. And if they're not matching up or aligning when you review them, fix them. You know, it doesn't mean they always have to be that way. Things will change. That's why it's so hard. That's why no one has come up with like the best HACCP template that you can just download and plug in your numbers, because every plant is so custom to their own world. So there is that flexibility and nice part about it, but it's also a pain when you don't know what the heck you're doing and you're just trying to survive too. So or you're just trying to learn this aspect of the business, so you don't have time for that. The value of discipline. So I had my kids' daycare provider, a good friend, at one point we were talking about disciplined kids, where my husband and I often talk that we probably discipline our kids more than the majority of their classmates. But I'll never forget, she said, kids want discipline. And through my time through college, they're doing the college work and then getting into the plant, I often found myself telling my managers, you know, employees want discipline. And I don't mean like you want to pull them in and whip them over the back with a stick. It's a matter of they want to know what is their expectation, and then they want to be held accountable for it, because it means they matter. And so and they have a clear path, so you can't get pissed off at an employee for doing something wrong when you haven't set the expectation. And the same goes for food safety and humane handling. And so if we don't have an expectation set, how do we hold ourselves accountable for high quality product, safe product, and humanely treated product? And as we discussed a little bit ago, regulatory inspectors can be a valuable resource, especially in that limited resource environment, building up that relation. It's not always easy. It's not always possible. There just are some that they're not going to. They're going to use everything you say to get you, because that's just unfortunately the kind of people they are. But I do believe that there's a lot of good ones. And boy, man, if you ever like find an inspector to be right and you let them know they were right, you've got a best friend for at least a couple days. That goes a long ways. I was helping a plant not too long ago, and essentially their plant inspector got told they were right, and so he quit talking about the 3 other things that he was pointing out days before that he was going to come after them for. So it's helpful. Be humble. The Prime Act, the things that I'm seeing as positives for the Prime Act, it got pointed out in some of the state inspection conversation. It recognizes the vast difference in individual states' economies, demographics, population densities, ratio of farms to population, access to resources. All of those things are so critical to how a meat processing supply chain is going to function. And if the states do it well and right, which I do believe the ones that do have inspection are, it really brings some value. And I think less, again, happy to hear less burden for those of you that are experiencing that within your own states. So it allows them to retrofit the program. And it could result in producers being able to open their markets to people that don't traditionally, I can't buy a full beef right now, but I would love to buy some ground beef from you. Gives the producers more markets. It gives the consumers more opportunity to support their local farmer. And we love the sound of that. I love the sound of that. I'm fortunate. I go find a friend and then they give me a beef that I can shoot and cut up on their, at their barn. And then I can go about my business and feed my family. Not everyone has that luxury. So anything. And so with that, can anyone else, I think I've got a thing here, but my computer's not advancing for some reason. Oh, now it's angry. Gotta move my thing. Is this the right one, David? So if you can think of any other goods, whether it's from a R regulatory standpoint or a P, again, this is a dash or no space one, or David, if you see anything. Actually, this one, I think you can write whatever, you can do spaces. This one isn't one of those word clouds. David, do you have anything in the comments where people are pointing out other things that are...
Yeah, if anybody has any comments on the good of either inspection or the Prime Act, we've talked about this a little bit. I think
Yeah.
at the end I do want to kind of open that up. But if anybody has any ideas about, I mean, I've got a couple questions. I've got an anonymous.
Yeah.
That is kind of in the middle, but this is an interesting. I think we'll open up the discussion. So if you're ready for that, it's going to happen. Okay, so
well, and we still have the bad and the ugly, but now is good to throw in whatever you've got.
Yeah. So the first one I have. The second one I'm going to wait till the end. But the first one I have, as a processor who serves both custom exempt and USDA producers, we have a different processing fee for custom versus USDA services, and the gap between them is increasing over time. If custom exempt products could be sold on the market, many producers would elect the lower price of custom processing, while our plant would still have the cost of maintaining its USDA inspection. In consequence, we would have to increase the price of custom exempt processing. The gap in processing price, that is the cost savings, for very small producers who are raising for their own consumption would be eliminated. Where does the interest of the individual family who's raising only for their household consumption fit into this conversation? Should they have to compete for slaughter space and keep the same price and pay the same price as producers who are raising for resale? I've got a lot of thoughts there. I'm sure other people do.
What are your thoughts, David?
Well, I mean, from a business standpoint, I don't want, I hope you don't mind us kind of derailing a little bit from the flow. From a business standpoint, ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're doing activity-based costing, and I know that in a lot of places in the country, you have to benchmark your fee structures based on what your neighbors are doing, or else you can't be competitive. I completely understand that, and I'm not saying that you should completely just throw that out the window today. But from an activity-based costing standpoint, there is no difference between custom processing and USDA processing if you are ensuring a safe, wholesome product. Now, I audit a lot of custom plants. So people hire me to come in and audit their operations and tell them how to be more efficient, or what they need to do to be cleaner, or what they need to do to train their staff. I probably am in 24 plants a year. And there are custom plants that are surgical and are running an operation like a USDA plant in a food safety and hygiene sort of way. And then there's custom plants where I walk in the cooler and there's more hair on the carcasses than I have on my head. Right? And that's something that is concerning to a lot of people when it comes to the Prime Act. And so I think that ultimately, if you're going super fast and you're not paying attention to wholesomeness of product, it's probably a lot cheaper because you can do twice as much beef in an hour on a kill floor. But if you're working in a super cleanly and sanitary fashion, it's probably pretty close in operational costs if you really do time studies, right? And obviously, inspection doesn't cost anything. Now, when you get into maintaining a HACCP practitioner and having people on staff that can keep and do your keep your food safety program, that's where the costs come in. So I think that's probably where a lot of the discrepancy in processing price goes. But if you spread the cost of that personnel and the training over the course of all the pounds that you process per year, I don't know that it's necessarily, I don't think we're talking like 75 cents a pound, $1 a pound, So those are my thoughts on the cost discrepancies between the two. And I think that that's just one perspective. I don't think that, I'm sure that there's a lot that could be said to counter those parts. And I'm very open-minded on that. I'd love to hear them. As far as like the raising for their whole household consumption, I just want to point out a couple things about custom. There is there is the personal use exemption. That's a fourth type of inspection or lack thereof. Personal use exemption means you could do whatever you want on your property with your animal. If you are going to be the person, all your non-paying guests and your family members are the only people consuming it. You don't even have to go to a plant. You could do it right, and that's a federal regulation. As far as another thing that is interesting that people should know, we could talk about this more later, is that there is no federal regulation on how many people can own an animal. Some states have some verbiage about that, but there is no federal regulation on how many people can own a beef. So if you want to get into the beef bundle game and you want to do custom exempt and sell 1/16 of beef or 30 seconds of beef, you can do that. And there is a way to structure that so that you can engage in custom exempt processing, sell more manageable bundles to people under the custom exempt structure very easily. So there's just a couple of things to think about there. Where does the interest of but I hear the question here, and it's how should people have to compete for the slaughter space as producers who are raising for resale? I think that there is some concern that the custom exempt processors will become jammed up too, and it will just transfer the problem to custom exempt out of USDA plants. That's kind of what I'm reading. I don't know. There's a lot coming up in the chat. Denise, do you want to comment on any of that stuff while I kind of read through this?
Well, I appreciated your business perspective on that response, because that was kind of what I was thinking is, unless it's creating USDA, it won't create USDA overtime. Or if it does, that would be, or if it's a non-amenable and you're paying for the inspection, then I could see, but yeah, your food safety, sanitation protocol should not change. And that's something we'll talk about in the ugly a little bit more. So I'm not going to divulge too much at all. I'll reference back, but anything else before we go into the bad?
Well, just to kind of counter what I just said, Lee Minas from NMPAN board as well, from NC Choices, says North Carolina generally recognizes up to 4 owners of an animal for custom exempt purposes. So some states do have a designation. Justin says, here in Texas, we finally got a law this session through the state legislation that doesn't limit the number of people who can own an animal before slaughter, so it can be broken into how many people. And it says it was a nice victory, and we got to join Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. And I know Washington does not have that regulation. I don't believe that Oregon does it as well. In California, I did not run into that. And so, it depends on where you are, but that could be an option.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't know. Did you ever see is Greg here?
I haven't. I don't think Greg ended up joining today, unless he's under a phone number.
I was hoping for his own memory, because I feel like he and I were in a federal conversation relative to that, where they were, and I think it was when we were on that committee, national committee, but I can't remember for sure. But I know we were very adamant that they leave that alone. They have no right to tell a producer how many people they can sell one animal to.
Yeah.
Where we got pretty grumpy about one.
Yeah. We got some other comments, but let's roll through the bad and keep going. And
yeah, we'll get through the bad.
Yep.
I'll skip the response slide because we're going to talk about it anyway on the next one. So regulatory control, the bad, 3 letters, CFR, and for you federal people here, you know what I mean. And as I alluded to, you have a bunch of attorneys writing the CFR, and it's, a 2 or 3 inch book. If you look at the book, most of us Google it. And then you've got veterinarians, in my case, a PhD, and sometimes, just people trying to get the work done, trying to interpret the same thing that was written by an attorney. And we all know how that goes in the plant, especially the more you're under pressure, financial pressure, production pressure, whatever, it can go well. And then on top of that, you know, there's interpretation, and then there's overinterpretation or misinterpretation. And a lot of times these pissing matches end up happening over something that really isn't directly going to like kill someone today. Not that we want it to get that far, but that's the perspective of the person that has all these other weights on their shoulders, is really that spider behind the pallet in my dock area. You really think that's going to put our food safety chain at risk? I don't think so today. You know, now if there's like a mass of them, a nest of them, and they're squirreling everywhere, okay, that's like, oh geez. But I can guarantee you every processor on this call today can give me, I know at least one of those where it's like, are you kidding me? And going back to that graph earlier, you know, insert that into the different facilities, right? A large facility is going to have plenty of barriers to just stop that before it even gets to the production level of pressures. But you get to that very small plant, and they're probably having this match with the owner who is trying to do all those different things, and answer all those different questions and train all those people and make the payroll and pay the bills. And that's the last thing they need. And you certainly aren't helping food safety at that point. I have plenty of my own examples. I don't think I can think of them right now. Where I just sat in the QA office thinking, are you kidding me? Like you're wasting my time with this when I need to be out on the floor actually preventing food safety hazards. And so it can get really frustrating. And then we talk about the bad with the Prime Act. I do believe that depending on how the levels of inspection or what's determined, there should be clear identification on the level of inspection and oversight. Very similar to the state inspection has the state stamp, you know. So if we have another layer under that, what does that look like, and how do we communicate to the consumer what it means, just so they can become more educated on what it means to them, and do their due diligence. Basically an avenue for the consumer to do their due diligence on if it meets their own expectations and personal requirements. This is a big one, and I think it's too much to ask in honesty. Consumers understanding a food safe and humane plant if they're going with custom exempt. So similar to what David said, he's been in several custom exempt plants. Some are crystal clean, pure, surgical. And there's others where it's like, oh God, no, I wouldn't want to. Well, I don't cook in my house because I char everything. So I want to kill everything. Kind of do that on purpose too. So it's kind of nice not to have to cook sometimes. But do they, do these consumers have the capacity or interest to do so? Will they take that initiative? And there will be more volatile variability in the quality of food safety and humane handling as regulatory oversight is loosened. You might personally say, no, there won't, because my facility is fantastic. But as David and I both know, we have both either been in or heard horror stories within plants that have very little, if any, regulatory oversight. I've heard them personally from customers, I heard one from a chiropractor whose patient was the slaughter guy at one of those, and thank God she knew enough about a good facility, or she probably wouldn't have eaten meat anymore from what he was telling her went on in that plant. And so we have to be realistic to know that just because your situation is fantastic doesn't mean that everyone's playing by the right rules to keep products safe and treat those animals well. And I know it's always like catch-22 to say treat animals well and then kill them, but it's important to give them the best life right up until you knock them humanely. So just chew on that a little bit. David will prompt some more conversation.
Well, that's a great question. I've got a note that somebody sent to me here in the chat directly. And okay, here's the question. In a world of social media farms, when you can market yourself in any way you like, and that's what sells your product, how can honest plants combat the social media presence of plants that have less oversight internally? So I think what they're asking is like, you've got a plant that can tell a story on social media, but they might not be doing what they say they're doing. they divert their resources to social media and have a very strong following, but it's a facade. How do honest plants compete with that? That's an interesting question. Does anybody have any
Yeah, I
thoughts
think
on
it's a
that?
fair and very good question. Because we all know what social media does. Everyone posts all the good days and never posts anything about the bad days.
And it's a tremendous tool also. I mean,
It is
yeah.
a tremendous tool that I would love to be better at. but yeah, but it is sometimes a very skewed view of what's going on. And when it comes to marketing and advertising, that's the job of marketing and advertising, right? Is to entice people into your product. And that goes back to that bad and how can we make sure there's clear understanding of what each of these means. But again, it does become kind of the onus on you to be good and do well and educate your own customers, whether that be producers coming through, and if you're a co-pack custom type processor where you're gonna slaughter for a customer, gonna go out to retail areas, there's a lot of sales that happens internally on, they say that, but they're, I look them up, they're not even, under this, that, or the other inspection. Or I go there, encourage the customer, go, do they open their facility to you coming through and seeing what's going on? But that is one of the challenges, is customers don't, they're not always going to be educated in the way that us meat nerds would love for them to be, is really understanding and grasping the whole picture. So that is one of the challenges, absolutely, and concerns.
Well, yeah, and Chris asks, what about the person that goes to eat at a restaurant that is purchasing a custom exempt product, say a medium rare burger? That plant does not use an antimicrobial intervention on the slaughter floor, and so there's no log reduction of potential pathogens, native pathogens to beef. That's my interjection. And then Chris says they may not actually have chosen that level of responsibility. So how do we, I mean, that's what happened with Jack in the Box, right? That's why the Food Safety Modernization Act happened, is because there was no forced CCP or critical control point for pathogen reduction on the kill floor in the early 90s. You could get a medium rare burger from Jack in the Box, and there was E. coli in it. So,
yeah, I know that
how do we
reminds
do
me
that?
of one of the points I wanted to make in the CFR thing, right? Like, rules are there for a reason. And so I am by far not the anti-rule person or anti-regulation person. I think that regulations have value. When I was first a professor, I did all teaching, and my first syllabus had one rule on it. I think by the end of the year, my syllabus had 5 rules on it. By the time I left the university, I was up to 11 rules. And it's because it's a whole expectation, accountability. If they're not there, people will break them, or you don't even know. So rules do exist for a reason. I think one of the bigger questions in this whole conversation that David and I have talked about previously is, to what level do each of them need to happen? And that's where we get into the ugly, right? Where it can, so regulatory control overstep. Again, I guarantee you at least everyone, at least one story of a rogue inspector, a power trip PHV or supervisor, poor district support. Now, I was fortunate. I can't say anything but good things about the Iowa district with Dr. Sproul's. I know that when I was in the industry, I was just dreading the day she retires, because everyone knows in industry, we dread the day that a good inspector is getting ready to retire, and we hope to retire before them. But that they do exist. I've heard the stories throughout the country, and I have fought for a lot of these facilities where I've heard the stories, sometimes successfully fought and sometimes not as successfully fought. So again, these types of overstep at limited resource facilities, they get bogged down. I think this is a lot of reasons small plants say, F it, I'm done. I can't do this. You're just drained. It might not be the only thing, but it definitely could be the straw that broke the camel's back. And then we go to the Prime Act, and now this sounds like the great unknown. Like, I feel any time that you change, like leave things to the politicians. It's scary. It could go really well, and it could go really sideways and be even worse than what, you get really excited because you're like, finally, and then all of a sudden you end up with this product that's like, oh, this is worse than what we started with. And so I think that would be something that I don't think that's like an inevitable. I think it's just something that everyone needs to be very cautious of. And I think when I say everyone, I'm really talking to not this audience. I'm talking to the people that are going to ultimately make these programs. Get the freaking processors in your office. Go see them, go talk to them, and not just one hand-picked one, but the people making these rules and regulations need to get out and talk to the industry. And talk to their audience and not just go with the easiest answer or who's giving them the answer they want. This next one is a huge one. And in one thing, one foodborne illness death is too many. And I think what people don't understand, I've taken more microbiology classes than I want to admit. What people don't understand is E. coli 0157H7, which we've all heard of or better have heard of by now if you're in the industry. One cell can kill a child. I'm talking one bacteria cell can kill a child, an immunocompromised person, an older person. One cell. You cannot see one cell on a carcass. And so if you are not taking food safety seriously, that's you are, even when you are taking food safety seriously, you're literally putting your work in people's lives in your work. And I'd have a manager, oh, you're just being, a little bit overboard there. And I'm like, no, I'm not, because it does, and it has. And until you've sat around the table with leadership within your plant, because you got word that your plant product was named as something a child ate just before their kidneys started shutting down and they're fighting for their lives, you don't understand what gravity that has, no matter how hard you're working to prevent that. Fortunately, in our situation, it was not our product. It turned out the child had some unpasteurized goat milk, but we were doing everything we could to not let that happen. We were testing above and beyond regulatory. Our sanitary dressing was as good as you can with humans doing it. We had preventative measures, we had hurdles, and we still knew that we were not immune to this happening. And everyone needs to understand that. And the less serious you take it, the more likely you will impact. So when you're saying, oh, it's just going back to the family. Well, they sure care about their dad, their mom, their kid, their grandma that's coming over. So yeah, I can go on about that. So you need to understand, it's serious, and just because you're smaller, producing less, doesn't mean you're immune to E. coli getting through the system, salmonella getting through the system, Campylobacter. I had that last year. Wasn't any fun, but of the ones, I take it again over others.
It's a rite of passage for people that work on poultry slaughter lines, getting Campylobacter and all of the fun things that happen with that.
I think I got it from some deli. So yeah, my daughter and I both got it. But again, just knowing that serious that would be a huge stain on not just the industry, but whatever inspection status that you are or not under. And then one preventable egregious humane handling incident is too many, and a stain on all the industry. I personally, if you're ever in my presence and not handling an animal well, will probably see my Irish temper come out. Now I'll typically calm down and get context, because maybe you weren't trained properly. That's not an excuse, but it at least helps me understand where I can go with it. So there's just no room for it. There's no reason for it. You got to be smarter than the animal and figure out how to run it well. And I worked in a plant that did a good chunk of bison. So you want to talk about animals that don't want to cooperate. And we managed to push them through without being inhumane. So those are areas where the less oversight, the more flexibility to really cause big problems happen. And again, not all of it's just because you don't care. A lot of it's just because you don't know what templates aren't there to help.
Yeah. Okay.
So real quick, I'm going to buzz through this one, David, just so we can get to more conversation. My thoughts on, making sure whatever the system might look like, if we pare down the regulatory, which I do think is a reasonable thing to talk about, especially when it comes to smaller audiences, the 4 areas that I do think are critical to making sure you have a solid base for food safety and humane handling is the HACCP and supporting SOPs. Before I came into industry, I'm like, HACCP, I don't care. I didn't really like HACCP. I didn't care about HACCP. It doesn't help that when I was in grad school, they were just implementing it. So our inspectors had no clue what to do either. And it got much cleaner over time. But they are valuable. Again, if you use it as an exercise to actually apply to your facility, if you're just doing it to do your busy work, it's not going to give you value. And that goes for all the good manufacturing practices, the sanitary processing, systematic approach to humane handling. Ashlyn, I saw Ashlyn on here. Her and Dr. Vogel and the rest of their group have the Humane Handling Institute in Wisconsin. Fantastic. I think the rest of the country is waiting for it to open up to more than just Wisconsin. And I highly, highly recommend you look into that and poke them. When you're opening, sorry, Ashlyn, whoever answers the emails, but fantastic opportunity to really start to learn what that means and understand what you don't know and have an avenue to learn more about it. And then back to properly training. So again, if you put together systems that actually mean something, not just like valuable to your food safety, but it also gives you a roadmap to talk through with your employees and show them the expectations, and when they're not following them, hold them accountable, which everyone, anyone that has to manage people can understand the value of that. You can't yell at them. You didn't tell them what you expect. I mean, you can, but that's going to piss them off there. In today's labor market, good luck with that. So some things that I just jotted down I think there's a certain amount of expectation with this type of roadmap that consumers and producers owe to the plants and themselves and their customers. And that's take ownership and understanding the general risk of the product, determine the level of inspection best suited for their intentions, learn how to effectively vet the facilities of interest. Going back to that level of inspection, when you get into those bigger plants or even the medium-sized plants, like a lot of their customers are going to be the Krogers and the Walmarts who expect S2F, on top of all the others. So this is those systems have kind of worked themselves out when we get that lesser regulatory oversight. There is less of that going on, and so we have to understand what we want to make sure that, or those customers have to tell us what they expect or understand. Learn how to effectively vet the facilities of interest and take ownership in maintaining food safety chain. So by that, I mean, it's not sterile product. No matter how hard we try at our plants, there is still risk. And it's not just meat. Surprise, surprise. Everyone, salads can give you the shits too. So like really understanding that every food we eat has an element of risk. What is that? And how do you do your best to keep it clean for your family or your customers? Don't sit in the back of your vehicle at, on a day like today when we're at like heat index and not frozen, and just hang out and expect it to be good. All right. And then, so I think David and I talked about kind of launching this off with, I had a list of what I think, processing plants owe to customers, but we thought it'd be better just, not speak at the audience, let the audience speak to us.
Yeah, now's a great time for us to kind of, I think, launch into our commentary phase. This is
Yep.
this is your last slide, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we've got some comments here stacking up, and just to kind of wrangle everything. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're really truly trying to gather data so that as this conversation progresses, as Dr. Perry, has other opportunities to speak to the House Judiciary Committee and NPAN, for instance, we are I'm next week going to be joining a small plant roundtable in Portland, Oregon with FSIS. We have these opportunities to influence change, and we want to hear what our community has to say. That's what this is all about. At the end of the day, we need your data and your voice to understand it, because you've got the boots on the ground, and that's what's really important. And we want the entire meat industry, from backyard butchers to consumers to producers to and all inspection levels, to be represented here. That's deeply important to us. So why don't we start off, and I'd like to get ideas of innovation and how to solve these problems. I want to talk about concerns. We've got some of those in the chat box. But just to start, the first question Dr. Denise has got for us is, what do you believe the processing plants owe to customers, which are the producers and the consumers? What do we as processors owe to our customers, end users, producers, wholesale? What do we feel as a group? What do we owe to them? What's our value proposition? So Mark's got transparency. That's a great one. Justin says, yeah, we got some good stuff stacking up here. Transparency, quality and safety, respect, a safe product. I mean, are we all in agreement here? I've heard this throughout the entire session. I haven't heard a single person go completely cowboy on us and say this should be absolute anarchy. There should be no oversight whatsoever. It's completely on the consumer's responsibility, and there should be absolutely no oversight. I haven't heard a single person say that yet. And the theme that I'm seeing is transparency, food safety, animal welfare, traceability has come up a couple of times. I mean, it seems like we're all on the same page here. People want to do this, and earlier in the conversation, Justin says that there was a project that was worked on for a number of years, and they were auditing custom plants, and there was nothing reported. The custom plants down in Texas look good. So maybe this perception of the majority of custom exempt plants being these like dark holes where there's not a lot of food safety going on, maybe that's actually not true.
Yeah, and I think it's optimistic that the people sort those out, similar to, a lot of times farms fold, not necessarily because of their size, but because of the management, and they kind of sort themselves out when things weren't being humane, the animals weren't as healthy, and the production wasn't as great. So you're not going to make money that way. So very similar situation.
AKA the marketplaces itself. I mean, that's a great point. I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a beautifully processed product that presents super well in a store that's actually like riddled with pathogens. Like you don't, people generally don't pick and choose what details they pay attention to. So I like your point there. That's really interesting. Anything else that we as processors owe to our customers, that you wake up every day, and this is, no matter how stressful it is, as a plant owner, as someone on the line, this is what you're holding your coworkers accountable to. There's somebody here, Cole Doherty, he's from the East Coast. He's a custom and game processor who has extensive experience under USDA inspection, and I would have no problem eating off the floor of his facility any day. He knows more about USDA.
Because I don't like to get diarrhea.
I mean, no, I hear you. That's obviously an exaggeration, but Cole knows more about FSIS regulations than a lot of people that I work with on a daily basis, and he chooses to work in custom exemption and game processing. I think because from what he talks about, he enjoys the one-on-one relationships. He likes that part of the industry, and that's why he works in that part of it. And so
a huge advantage that he understands the regulation, because then he can apply it in the sense that's practical to his operation and to his customers, without some, the element of unknown, which is what person is coming into the plant today to tell me what that they know more than I.
Yeah.
I'm going to interject a point here. I think for me, the biggest concern goes back to what was on the last slide, which is it's not that we can't or we're not performing well under custom exemption. I think it's if you allow for a larger pool of people to get into this business, even one issue with humane handling or food safety is too much. And so I'm fearful because I have worked for people who, because it's a tight margin business, and because they have customers screaming at them, I need my product for tonight's service at my restaurant, are willing to push things through. And so that's kind of, it's not to me about the custom exempt process that we're in now. It's allowing for kind of a larger scope to be introduced to that type of processing that concerns me more.
And I think that's a good point. And David, you mentioned someone put traceability. I know that was a big part of the conversation with this as well, is traceability would be really important at this level, especially when there's an outbreak. How do we make sure we can go back to where it came from?
That's true. That is incredibly important. This person says, in my novice understanding, traceability is a concern when it comes to making custom exempt slaughtered meat or itinerant slaughtered meat for retail sale. Could blockchain technology enable new methods of traceability in the absence of continual on-site inspector presence? I mean, traceability is a big deal. To your point, Doctor, it's like if something does go sideways, we got to be able to recover that product.
Yeah,
you just got to be able to. It's like anything. It's like if I'm a manufacturer of light bulbs and none of them work, I got to call all my customers and say, hey, look, I'm going to replace that product. These are no good, right? You got to do what's right when you deliver a product. So traceability is a big deal. Traceability is scary. If you don't know how to do it and you're not forced to do it, it's scary. It's even scary in USDA inspected plants. How many times have you had an inspector come in and be like, we got to start a recall, and everybody just about faints, right? So what I like to do with my plants is quarterly we do a recall game. It's all about training. It's all about working that muscle. I think you can do that in any plant.
Yes.
It doesn't, you can do that in a custom exempt plant. You can do that in a USDA plant. I don't think that it has to be different. I think that traceability is really important.
Yeah, the first time I ran a mock recall, I was like blown away at how much I learned and how much improvement we had to make. And it was so rewarding, 4 or 5 or 6 mock recalls down the road, how my list got way shorter. And so it was a huge exercise and gap exercise that was very valuable. I should have that as a 5th pillar, really. So whoever put that, I'm gonna have to up my pillars to 5 now.
Yeah. Here's one discussing a concern, and I want to get to Aaron Johnson's comment in just a moment because this is I think really fruitful. But another concern. So Mark says we're discussing concerns we have over the scummy small plants, and scummy's rough. Maybe like untrained or archaic or need some help. But I hear what you're saying, Mark. What about the concerns of influence peddling or price fixing? Those seem pretty scummy to me. That's not something. I'd love to hear more about that, Mark. If you wanna grab the mic and talk about price fixing for a minute, or if somebody else wants to mention that, just bring it into the conversation. I think that's kind of the it sounds like we're kind of saying what we're really concerned about with custom plants, but this is a concern I think about inspected plants and like probably the big 4, right? We're talking about like the big plants when we're talking about price fixing.
Yeah. I guess, most of us here are small processors. We do business with our neighbors. We feed their families like we feed our families. And when we have a large national food industry like we have, we are not concerned with large outbreaks. We should not have the same regulations that these large processors do. And scummy was in quotations, and that I'm just trying to characterize, the fear that everybody here is talking about. But in business practices, what I feel is pretty scummy is how, people are paying, settlements of millions of dollars for price fixing and for influence peddling in overseas nations. That seems pretty scummy business practices. And if they're willing to run their business like that, what are they willing to do to their food product for their customers without regulations?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And so the concern is if there's less regulations, that will be more rampant, Mark? Or are you saying that they're able to get away with it now because the regulations kind of allow for it?
I guess what I would say is that these regulations are in place because of these large companies not caring about the people that they're serving. I inherently care about the people I serve because it's local and they're my neighbor. And if I do bad business, they won't do business with me. I don't need the same regulations that they need because my business is fully transparent.
I don't think you need the volume of regulation that the larger plants, but I would argue that there are regulations that you need just as well as they do. And I think the customer relationship is very different as you go large. But we have to remember in those large facilities, they're producing millions of pounds in hours, and that can very quickly impact a large population. And so their care becomes a business care, probably business preservation care, more than a, hey, you're my neighbor care. But I do think that there is, I know a lot of people that work within these large facilities. I do not think they're the devil. I think there are bad players, but I also believe there's bad players at every level. And so I think we want to look out for, I think what regulation or not, I talked about this in my little risk made up diagram, like regulation or not, the good people are going to do the good things and do what they can to do well and right. And the bad people are going to do what they can to break the rules. And that's not, no one's immune to that. Just because, you live in a small community, I've known really shitty people in small communities, and I've known really fantastic people in small communities. The same goes for the large processing communities. There's really good people and there's not so good people. It's just go across the ocean and the same thing. There's good people and there's bad people. There's people that want to do right and there's people that don't care about doing right. And then there's people that just want to do right, but they need help doing better. And so I don't think it's as simple as big, small, little, smart, dumb, any of those. It's not black and white.
Yeah, true. But it is interesting to think about what would it be like to have a slightly different, that middle ground. Like I said,
yeah.
no one here is talking about kind of throwing everything out the window.
No,
but
and that was one of the questions asked to me when they were vetting me is, what does it look like? And I said, that requires someone to go through the CFR and cross out all the things that don't apply to the small plants. And is that realistic? No, that's an extreme version of it, but how do we piece out those really high impact regular rules or templates or guidances to help make sure that it's setting the custom exempt up for success in this kind of environment?
And I know we're over, but I just want to take another, let's start with 10 minutes to see what we can come up with as far as feedback. So I want to talk about some ideas about like what's the middle ground look like? What are some things that we would commit to as the small niche processors and say, maybe there are certain regulations in CFR that are way over the top, they're unapproachable, they're difficult to train. What are some things that if the state was in charge would be on our wish list? What are some things that we would commit to and would like to see from these state programs that maybe are a middle ground that, to Mark's point, kind of uphold those personal direct-to-consumer relationships? These are your neighbors. This is who you're selling meat to. What are some things that maybe state inspection could, elevate custom exempt a little bit, but not be, what's a middle ground look like? That's what I'm curious about. And so I've got a couple of comments here in the question box here that I'd like to bring up. So Jay Byron says, I think there need to be some labeling restrictions to preclude customers from reselling the products into retail commerce, maybe stamping the product not for RE sale or something similar. So, so what I'm hearing is a special designation on the label that maybe tells the customer, go ahead, buy it. This is the level of inspection it's under. What would that look like? What would that do to the price point? What would that do? How do we tell that story? I think that there's a lot of interesting points there from a labeling perspective. I'd love to hear people's.
Great point.
Yeah, really interesting. I like that idea and would like to hear more about that. Let's see, Justin says, I think some basic requirements for custom plants to use some sort of microbe control that's very easy to do that would help ensure safety. That's one of my biggest my biggest concerns is like sanitary dressing. I know a lot of custom butchers that are world class. We talk about having an American team on the World Butchers Classic, and like best butchers in America are in small custom plants and on lines and giant plants. Like the best people with knives out there,
Amazing what they can do with sanitary dressing.
Amazing.
Such a critical component.
It would really help me, personally. I would love to know that there was some sort of basic antimicrobial. Carcass wash is like required. And it doesn't have to be like hydrochloric acid or peracetic acid or something weird like that. But like, there's people using acetic. If you can make vinegar and a 50-50 of vinegar and water work, we're talking like a 2 to 4 log reduction on basic native pathogens. Acetic acid is pretty expensive at the end of the day. So maybe we'd have to come up with some solutions there. But I love that idea, Justin. I think that's great. Okay, yeah. Mark says limited sale to HRIs, hotels, restaurants, and institutions, kind of like the retail exemption today. One thing I do want to mention is we're going to follow up this episode. I'd love it if Dr. Denise wanted to join me, where we're going to talk about the real width and breadth of retail and custom exemption. What you can really do that you might not know about. And so one of those things is limited sale to HRI of certain product categories. One thing that's interesting that Aaron Johnson mentions is, to what extent is a mentorship approach to regulatory oversight more resource intensive? To the extent it is, and to the extent that making an approach more prevalent would be a win, a policy strategy of advocating for more resources for federal and state inspection agencies that is tied to adopting more mentorship approaches could be an alternative to additional policy theory of change. I think we would all like to see FSIS be more educationally focused, more mentorship focused. I mean, it should, in my opinion, I'm really going out on a limb here. I think that it should be a collaborative partnership approach. High tide raises all boats. I'd love to see them teaching. I'd love to see them taking us under their wing as opposed to being food cops. I've heard that state inspection is a lot more like that. One thing I learned recently that I want to share with the group that I have never heard of before, and I'll stop talking in a second, I'm sorry, I'm taking up all the oxygen. I met somebody from Washington, D.C. at the AMP conference that Nelson and his team put on, which was the best AMP conference I've ever been to. It was fantastic. I met this person this year from Washington, D.C., who was an EIAO for FSIS, who told me about a little-known program that apparently has existed forever that I've never heard of, called non-regulatory advising. And apparently, for you inspected plants, you can go to your frontline supervisor and request non-regulatory assistance from an EIAO. Apparently, for free, they will come to your plant with regulatory blinders on and sit with you. I know, right? So I might ask to go to Denny's or something, or like the library.
Yeah, but, that's the problem. They have these like pie in the sky ideas what that means, but at the end of the, I fell for that trap.
Did you really? So you tried it?
Oh, we were at the very small round table in Pennsylvania, and that was like, reach out, it was Brian Sapp challenging us all, like, we're all complaining, we're going to use these EIOs as our helpers, our outreach, right? EIOs are supposed to be mostly outreach. He's like, so now we just complained about it. So now we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we've got to outreach. So I'm like, gosh, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And so I outreached to an EIO that had been a pain in our side before. I'm going to do this because Brian said so. And I met her off site. I was simply talking about, it was a super safe topic. We were going to build a new slaughter floor, trying to get proactive information from her and insight to make sure we're considering the things. And it was a very nice conversation. Get ready to leave. Oh, how long has it? It's been a while since you've had an FSA, huh?
Oh.
And I was like, son of a bitch. Literally 2 weeks later, we're getting an FSA.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting.
That's the part. Like, everyone has these beautiful, magical ideas of yeah, we'll put blinders. Bullshit. You won't. They're not going to. It's impossible. I don't know how you can. Like, it's such a conflict of interest. And the best, and Greg Gunthorpe said it when he was talking to the House Judiciary. I said it when I was getting vetted, is they need a neutral party that serves as some level of mediator, ombudsman, that type of thing, that is not affiliated with government, because of exactly what just happened with, me when I was testing it out. And I know others could give other examples, and it's unfortunate. But I also can see it from the EAO standpoint. When they are supposed to be watching for that stuff, how can they turn? Now, she didn't have to freaking ask me about that at all. It wasn't even, I was on the other end of my facility. I wasn't talking about cooking anything with her. And so, and I called Paul Kicker after that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like, come on. I mean, not that it stopped the FSA, I still had it.
So let's say hypothetically that's a great idea in theory, but in practice they can't. It's a conflict of interest. So maybe
I so wanted to tell the other story to the processors and give them hope, but it was, I was just the naive one coming out of it.
So maybe there's an in-between where there's a contracted or a publicly elected ombudsman, like you mentioned, who represents plants, who's not affiliated, who can maybe facilitate some sort of outreach that's not an EIAO. Maybe there's an in-between there somewhere.
Someone that has the sense to say, okay, now there's going to be issues that you encounter where you're like, oh crap, let's talk about what this means. But most of them are like, not ideal. You've been doing this for 20 years. You haven't had any food safety recall or issues like complaints, all that. Let's just make sure we get compliant with the regulation. Because the regulation isn't perfect. I mean, let's talk about Appendix A and B and what what we just went through with that. And they're still not there. They've got scientific gaps, and they're doing what they have with what they have. There's so much that they're just like, well, this scientific paper said that's what it should be. Well, that scientific paper is exactly to those inputs. And we've been doing these inputs for this many years, and we have no illness. So we know this works. So it's like, yeah. I could rant about that. So really understanding what is like a oh shit moment. Now we should get regulators involved. Someone that can balance that, right? Or hey, this isn't great, but this isn't how you want to continue to do business, because you're going to eventually get in trouble. Or this could eventually, become a big issue. Let's get it cleaned up right now and move forward. Yeah, having someone like that would be fantastic.
So some ideas that we've got from our group so far about how we can make this Prime Act a little bit more viable. So, or something like it, right? We talked about mandatory kill for CCPs, right? We've talked about potentially an ombudsman, and Anne actually from ATRA put in a link to an agricultural ombudsperson in California for California's agricultural and natural resources. It's an Ask the Ombudsperson open survey sort of resource. So everybody click on that link. This could be what that looks like. I'm really curious about that. We've also heard about limiting sale to HRI. This is an idea. How do we do that? We've talked about traceability being a requirement in the process for the Prime Act. We've talked about Let's see. We got a couple other ideas here. Lee Minas from NC Choices says some sort of continuing education requirements on food safety processes, animal health, basically passing the role of on-site inspectors to plant owners. So you got to pass some sort of bar, right? I think that's a great idea, and would love to see that. And Lee's been all over. Lee's been a producer. He's been a processor. He works at the academic level. He works in policy. He's seen it. And he's seen it all, and I think that that's a really interesting idea, and I'm curious, to model out what that would look like, right? Chris adds, this may have already been said, but in relation to training, licensing, requiring a short course and online test to at least demonstrate understanding the pitfalls for food safety and humane handling, as well as worker safety, which sometimes is overlooked during these conversations. You're totally right, Chris. It is often overlooked. Worker safety is such a huge deal, and is really like food safety, animal safety, and worker safety really are like the big three pillars, and we focus so much on food safety and humane handling that we don't talk about the people in our plants enough, and would love to do one of these with you about that, Chris, because I know that's a really big focus in your consulting practice and in the work that you've done as a plant manager. I totally agree. At least if you don't have a HACCP coordinator on staff, management can demonstrate an understanding. That's important. Cole recommends education on both sides for processors and state inspection staff. So for states like New Jersey, where I'm located, the DEP has pushed meat processing out of the state, and with that, so has food safety inspection, specifically in the meat realm. The ripple effect causes poor local inspection and an increase in lousy conditions in the very few custom plants and shops, mostly game shops. Tyler shares that in Vermont, the state of Vermont sends issues to a couple independent consultants to avoid conflict of interest. So it sounds like that's kind of under that ombudsperson model. Anne shares that Karen Giovannini is the California Agricultural Ombudsperson and employee of Cooperative Extension. She has a great website and is very knowledgeable. So everybody kind of look into that. Lee, what do you got?
So I'm curious as to how, curious as to how the Prime Act plays in relation to, Meat Inspection Act on a law-based level, because we've spent the last 20 years, adopting basically unified food codes so that all the counties in the state and all the states have comparable requirements between health departments. We've got states like ours that have their meat inspection programs, and those programs are contingent with them being in compliance with federal meat inspection guidelines. And so is there been any look into how Prime affects DHS oversight of these things, and how it, I realize our state's not going to support it because of the state meat inspection program, but does that, if it did support it or some form of it, is it going to be considered Federal Meat Inspection Act, part of the Meat Inspection Act, or a freestanding act? And so does compliance with the federal meat inspection become compromised if we do participate in it in some degree?
I think that's a great question. I think they have it still vague because they want to leave it to the states, that would be a huge topic that needed to be brought up during the discussions within every individual state, is how does, what is the authority and what does it mean?
We've recently had some issues with custom exempt stuff here jeopardizing our compliance. And that's been a big topic this year that we've been working with. And, that's one of the concerns is if some of the stuff they're saying no to now, this is only going to make it worse if we have people pushing for this, and it eventually. Yeah,
I think that goes to that collateral damage topic, right? It's those, how does it interact? Yeah, no, I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really even know what to say about that. I'd love to bring some other voices in the conversation to talk about that. I mean, Lee, what are your thoughts?
I mean, me personally, I've always argued that, you don't see people dropping dead of consuming deer meat, and you don't get a crappier mishandling of meat than most of the deer out there that end up on the dinner table. So I think, my personal view is that things are probably a little more flexible than they seem in reality. But, I also, know that we've got to follow one food safety issue is one too many, because, we want to preserve that, not only the safety of that, we've got to preserve, our opportunities industry wise, farming, meat processing and everything needs that track record to remain good. I think if it's done correctly and if people want to participate in those type programs, but they got to realize that, they're taking ownership of the steps that are getting omitted. And, if they're going to participate in the program, doesn't have an inspector there, then they're going to have to step up and take the role of the inspector. And how does that get regulated to the point that it's satisfactory, or, people at least figure out what they're doing? Because like you said in the beginning, a lot of it boils down to not knowing what you don't know. And how do we let people know what they need to know?
Right, and I'm just going to speak to the deer processing point, right? There's an element of knowing your system and what it can handle. And so there's deer, people have been processing deer for years, have been eating their, as a kid, they've been eating the processed deer, and it's a generational thing. And so I guarantee they're probably much more immune to things than, we just got done with COVID, right? Like the person that's doing a full wipe down of the Walmart cart, in wearing gloves and wearing a mask and a hat and some other costume. There's that level of inherited immunity is a big thing. And so the more that goes back to that graph of the more your audience reach, the more you don't know what you're serving. So when you're serving your neighbors and like, hey, they're on a dairy farm and they're eating sandwiches in the parlor between milking, they're probably gonna be fine. They've eaten more crap than any of us collectively in one milking. So that's where it becomes more unknown. So in Mark's point, like he knows the families, and it's like, okay, but do you know their immunity? Do you sometimes you don't know the kid has leukemia yet until it's too late. And so, the more you don't know, the more risky it gets, or the less you eat dirt. My kids grew up eating dirt because I believe in, getting their systems ready for some bad days.
And I don't know if anyone's talked about this yet, but I think that something I've been keeping my eye on is the use of AI. And I feel like if we're going down this road of less inspection on site, it should be really easy to have mandatory reporting, community-based modeling of risk factors. There's probably several ways that we can use technology to kind of like get the inspector out of the plant, but still have a safe product coming out the door, even without putting the traditional onus on the plant operator, and so I don't know if that's part of the conversation with an act like this. I'm sure there's a lot of budgetary concerns, but to me, that's kind of the direction I'd like to see things go is basically modeling risk and applying that to the local level. Yeah,
that's a great point. We do have tools that we're not really using, and risk modeling is a really interesting point. I wonder what would happen, and maybe we need to do this. Maybe NPAN needs to do this. I wonder what would happen if we put it out there. Like, are more people interested in the Prime Act because they want to sell HRI without inspection, or are more people interested in processing custom exempt, having retail cuts in a cooler in their farm store to sell to their neighbors? Because I think those are two very different conversations. And what I mostly hear is I should be able to sell what I raise on my property to my neighbors without having to drive 8 hours to a USDA plant. I should be able to process that on farm or in a state inspected or city inspected space. Do a farm kill, take it to a commissary kitchen, process it, and sell it out of my farm store. I hear more people talk about that than HRI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder how that split is with folks, and would really like to know. And maybe we need to do a survey for that. Aaron, what do you got?
Yeah, just I don't know if this fits into HRI or not, but I have also had a couple interesting conversations with rural grocery store owners who talk about, like, back in the day, they were able to process meat from farmers and sell it in their meat counter. And that opens up a whole nother conversation about like rural grocery and how it's been driven out of many towns due to corporate concentration. So like, I don't know if that falls into that HRI category, but that is another conversation that I've had with at least a couple folks.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too. I mean, what's the difference between the farm store and then going to the small market that services, the 100 households? I used to live in a town of 300 people in Michigan where my small farm was, called Edenville, and we had the local meat counter, and the Edenville market definitely was probably selling farm killed beef, I'm pretty sure. And you could, the point is like the only people that went there were the 200 people that were in the town. That's the only people that shopped at the Edenville market, and yeah.
Well, and the key thing is like for some of these small rural grocers that are independent, like selling meat and dairy and eggs is the differentiator between them and the dollar store, right? So that's what makes it an interesting conversation to me. If you can get the right, like technological applications to ensure that it's safe.
Yeah, Aaron, that's exactly why I was hoping someone from Alaska, because I do feel like they're one of the extremes because they have so much rural versus populated that literally could be, such a huge accessibility point for them that they're not getting now. Maybe they're fine, maybe need to worry about it, but I feel like the more rural and the harder it is to get places and get resources, this could really benefit.
Mark, what do you say?
Seems like the conversation that we're having here is about how much ownership of our eating should the eater have. And I don't think it should be up to you or me to decide how much, let's say, for example, Denise or Chris or Aaron wants to take ownership of that. But if we tell them that they can't eat raw milk or drink raw milk, then they don't have the option for that.
Yeah, raw milk is a really interesting example. I mean, that's a great example, right? There's places where you simply can't buy it. And then you have to go and you have to meet somebody in a dark parking lot in the middle of the night on a Tuesday behind the White Castle to get your 2 gallons of raw milk. And I've been in that position, and you really don't know what you're getting. Whereas in states where you can get access to it, that those people, they've made an enterprise of it, and they're doing a great job. That's a really interesting comparison, because I think it is actually really similar, Mark. And you're right. There is a huge part of this conversation is what is the responsibility of the consumer, because we've kind of taken that away, right, through a lot of regulation. You don't really have to have a lot of knowledge as a consumer. I mean, to be honest with you, if I'm not buying from a farmer's market, I'm showing up at PCC here in Seattle and I'm buying a steak, and I don't even think twice about it, right? That is also a really interesting and important part of this conversation that is very much in the conversation we're going to have at the Small Plant Roundtable when we talk about this. What is FSIS's like, and the state inspection services? What is your vision of the consumer's responsibility here?
In my opinion, as long as our packages are clearly labeled as to how we process, the transparency is going to give the consumer the information they need to make their own decision for themselves.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Mark. Just a couple more comments. I'm going to try to jump off here. We'll try to wrap it up by 11 because I'm sure a lot of people have to go back to work. But Justin says, with the Prime Act, I feel like there would also be somewhat self-limiting feature as big grocers and other big players won't want to purchase the custom meat because of inherent liability. At Farfa, we have a good relationship with natural grocers, and they have already said that although they will be glad to drop a note in support of the Prime Act, there's no way they would buy from a processor like that because of the associated liability. True. That's what SQF is for, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, that's already happening. Yeah, I mean, even with beyond regulatory, then they've got SQF. First it was third-party audits, then it was GFSI, which SQF is one of them. And they're always updating their editions. So yeah, there is definitely a self-limiting factor. And I think, and I agree with Mark. Like, I really fight between the two. Like, this is freaking America, right? What you want, but there's the litigation and liability. So if, everyone's willing to take the risks, accounted for, where is the limit? I don't know. I think but then you have to think about kids, they're at their parents, whim. So we all maybe come from great backgrounds in parenting, but not everyone does. And so we owe it to people that are kind of the underdogs to figure out what the right balance is to make sure that everyone's setting up for as much success as we can. So if it might work for our own, immediate area, we have to try and do the best we can for others too. And that's why it's a difficult subject. I constantly struggle with not wanting, go away regulators, but understanding sometimes there's a necessary evil to protect the people that aren't old enough to or capable of. And so where do you draw the line? It's not ever going to be a line. It's a gray area.
Jennifer, this is the last comment I've got. I probably skipped a couple by accident, but certainly not intentionally. Jennifer asks, are there advances in sampling that could help with in-house testing of product, that could help with cost and time that is involved with product sampling? Personally speaking,
E. coli, or
yeah, I think so.
Recently there has been something that came out. I think it's about the same cost though, but the time and energy, there's like a for combo level testing, but yeah, it's expensive, and if you're not close to a lab, that's the other, again, going rural, right? And why I really think this is a conversation is, the plant I led was 30 minutes from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of labs that we could choose from. That's a luxury.
From as far as bang for buck goes, I would rather have a very strong prevention system over a testing system. I would rather spend the money on prevention than money on testing.
Yes, the testing should just be a validation of that your prevention's working. And I've found hot water, a good hot water wash is every more effective as any acid. Acid's just another hurdle, but I would never do acid without a hot water wash. After what I didn't try. Well, yeah, I did try. So yeah, I mean, the hot water carcass wash can be huge.
Oh yeah, good. I think there are definitely validated papers that show certain temperatures, like 130 and above, with this pressure, with this coverage, that's getting, I think 2 to 3 log reduction, and
yeah,
3
you
log is
remember,
99.9.
Yeah, you're in line. It loses a lot of heat pretty quickly. So
sure. Yep. Okay, this has been really interesting. This is really this was a fact gathering, an opinion gathering, a temp taking conversation. We wanted to give a little background, but also get kind of where our community's at. I think I've got a really good list of interesting ideas. And to be honest with you, this is not at all what I expected. I expected torches, pitchforks, and recommendations for total anarchy. I did get some weird emails beforehand that kind of led me down that direction. But I will say, like, this has been a very collaborative discussion, and I think we've asked some really interesting questions, and I've got a list of I think ideas that are not total anarchy. They're just a different level of what we're already. Oh, Greg's here. Greg joined the call.
Greg, what's your question, Greg? Come on, Greg.
Greg's just joining as he connects to audio. I think we've got a lot of really interesting ideas about accountability in that custom exempt space here, and I really hope that we can keep this conversation going. We're going to have some follow-ups that are going to include discussions about retail and custom exemption and what we actually can do under the existing regs that maybe we don't know we can do. Retail exemption really has a far throw of what you can do underneath it, and custom exemption, I think there's a lot of innovation where these minds that are in this group here right now can approach the custom exempt ruling as it is today, and I think we can squeeze more juice out of it personally while we're waiting for this national conversation about the Prime Act to mature. So, Greg, good to see you. I'm sorry that we missed you. We would love to hear what you have to say. So I think we would really like to have you on the follow up when we do another one of these NPAN lives.
I've been waiting 2 days for his burning question. Waiting 2 days for your burning question, Greg.
Greg, have you got something in a nutshell you want to throw out there for the group?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
Yeah, I apologize. We had feed grinder issues, so I got took away and then didn't get back. But my question was along the lines of the technical resources that NMPAN could provide for the understanding of the administrative process, your rights before you're a plant and when you're a plant. I still see those as the biggest challenges that especially the new people face, the understanding how to use Ask FSS and how they can use it, the understanding how they can question inspectors and actually getting them to follow through on those kind of things, how they can use EIOs for resources rather than just compliance. That was my question, I guess, is what can be done on those fronts.
I'm really glad you asked that, Greg. If anybody doesn't know, Greg is the newest member of our technical assistance provider network at NMPAN, which we're really happy to have him on board. We have 3 people in this call right now. We actually have 4 people here that are involved in technical assistance through NMPAN. So Dr. Perry, Lee Minas, Greg Gunthorpe, myself, but there's also other faces here that understand regs that are very happy to help. So just in a nutshell, to answer Greg's question, you can go on our website, go on nichemeatprocessing.org, go to the top of the page where it says technical assistance, click that link, okay? Click that link and it's going to take you to a page that lists about 12 different people. You'll see my name. You'll see Greg's name. You'll see Dr. Perry's name. Lee is linked on our website under our People of NPAN, and you can reach out to ask those questions. Whether you're in the phase of you're a custom exemption wanting to make a custom exempt processor wanting to make the leap to state, retail exempt, federal inspection. If you want to know about grant writing, if anybody is not aware, just a couple hours ago, MPEP Round 2 was announced. It's going to be very quiet. There's not going to be a big press release, but it is live on sam.gov or grants.gov as of today. A major grant just dropped this morning that is going to be very quietly announced. So NPAN can help with those regulatory gaps where you want to know how to work with USDA, how to obtain your grant of inspection, how to apply for and locate funding for making that leap. We've got some people on our staff that are operations experts that can help you with building your quality management program that includes HACCP. You've got Lee, who's seen every side of it from a producer all the way through the academic side and processing in between. You've got Dr. Denise, who has done all of it and managed it in the plant setting, as well as Greg, as well as myself. We've got Chris Fuller, who was on the call, who's also one of our technical assistance providers. We've just got a super deep bench of people who can help you navigate that for free. Right? And then if you want to get really deep or have someone who can be like a very personal liaison or be someone who's on retainer or be your person who you can call night and day with questions or do some of the heavy lifting for you, we have consultants who have private practices that we can recommend that we know do good work, right? There's a lot of consultants in the world right now, and not all consultants are created equal. Dr. Denise and I have had that conversation several times, and but there are some great ones out there who know what the heck they're talking about and are approachable and affordable, and would love to work with you. So we have those resources to help you make that leap, or even just to dip your toes in, just to understand what the gap is. That's what we exist for. That's what NMPAN is all about. Is the success of this community. So thanks for asking, Greg. I really appreciate you bringing that up. And anybody that's watching the replay of this, again, nichemeatprocessing.org. Jump in there and go to the technical assistance link at the top. So,
hey, can I say one other comment? And
please.
I apologize because, like I said, I missed everything that you talked about. But did you discuss that as a possible reform in the next farm bill? I personally believe that the Curtis Amendment should be extended to poultry slaughter plants, so that the very small poultry slaughter plants can do both inspected and exempt chicken. I think it was an oversight when they did it.
Okay. Could you put that in the chat, or could you say it again, Greg, real quick? I'm just going to put it in here so it's in the record.
Sure. The Curtis Amendment, where inspected establishments can do not for sale and inspected red meat and slaughter in the same establishment, that is not allowed in poultry slaughter plants. And I personally believe it was an oversight in 1970 when the Curtis Amendment was passed. And I think that in the very smallest 4-fee poultry slaughter plant, I think it would provide them a lot more opportunities where they could run days that were, not for sale chickens, or they could run after hours with not for sale chickens, or could package chickens that were going back to people's own freezers.
Agreed. Okay. Yep. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for bringing that up. And we definitely want to add that to the conversation because we're having a lot of calls at NMPAN about poultry processing right now. So hopefully maybe that would be another good follow-up for us to do here.
Yeah, I think it would make the little one a lot more viable.
Agreed. Well, thanks again, everybody, for sticking around. Really appreciate it. It was super fun today.
Great. Yeah, great audience. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dr. Denise. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.